Hello, everybody. I'm here today with Nancy Spannaus. Uh, Hello, Nancy.
Hi.
Good, good. Um, Nancy Spannaus is uh, really a long time inspiration for me in my history work, and her original work, as I would say, undoubtedly the authority on Alexander Hamilton, the authority today, has been really important in shaping my own conceptions. Nancy is the author of um, two recent books. Uh, One of them is uh,
Hamilton versus
Hamilton versus Wall Street. So would say the whole name of that book.
Hamilton versus Wall Street, the core principles of the American system of economics.
Okay, good. And the
2019.
2019, and the most recent book is Defeating Slavery. Can you show that one?
Yes. Defeating slavery, Hamilton's American system showed the way. Whoops.
Good, good.
Am I
And
wrong?
you've been giving talks recently on that subject in a lot of public places. So now also Nancy is the host of a blog, American System Now, which you can go on to as soon as we're done with this interview. And I certainly would recommend it. She's super active in giving you really essential pieces of our history. So let's get into talking about particularly Alexander Hamilton. First question I would have is, how essential would you say Hamilton was to the founding of the United States?
Well, in my view, he was, without Alexander Hamilton's role, I don't believe we would have had a United States. There are three areas where he played a very critical role. The first was actually calling the Constitutional Convention. He with Madison wrote the call for having a convention after the failure of the Annapolis meeting that was supposed to coordinate economic cooperation between various of the colonies in 1786. And he and Madison decided to take the bold move of saying, next May, everybody should get together and revise these Articles of Confederation. He did it. It was bold. They only had 5 states represented. They didn't have a consensus. They took an initiative. And that's number one. Number two,
that led directly to the
that led directly
Constitutional Convention.
because the Congress did then forward it to all the states, and the Congress did play a role. This was sent to
was Hamilton's
Confederation Congress,
yeah.
And they forwarded it, and everybody showed up except Rhode Island, right? So the second thing is getting that Constitution passed. He was not only the author of the definitive writings about the philosophy and content of the Constitution in the Federalist Papers. He wrote the lion's share of them and initiated that in October of 1787. But he coordinated, that's just part of it, he had to coordinate with Madison in particular in Virginia to make sure that New York and Virginia ratified. Because if these big states did not ratify, it didn't really it didn't work to have nine states
Right.
agree, right?
And there were anti-federalists in those two states, right?
Absolutely. There was an overwhelming majority of opposition in New York, and there was a strong faction which made it a bit iffy in Virginia. But Hamilton succeeded through various means with collaboration with Jay, with support, and some say with even blackmail of saying New York City would not go along if the state decided not to go with the Constitution. But they succeeded in getting the agreement. So that's number two. And then number three was he took a situation where the country had no credit and was bankrupt, and created a functioning financial and economic system.
This is right after the revolution.
Right after the Constitutional Convention. He was appointed to be, he was the first cabinet appointment to the Treasury, and he went to work even before that, actually, but to actually bring the country out of bankruptcy. So I'd say on all those counts, we owe our existence in many respects to the incredible energy and mental effort of Alexander Hamilton.
Okay, so colonial America before the revolution was controlled by an overseas empire. I'm going to ask the same question, I guess, in a few ways. What rules did the British set for the Americans in those days? What's the trade pattern of a country controlled by the system of empire, and what was Hamilton's vision for an independent USA? And I would say, if you want to go on to his conception of the society of the future.
Well, that's a big one.
It's a big question, but so
yes, it's a
I
big one.
focus on the trade and the idea
Right.
of what kind of country he wanted to
Well,
be.
of course, Hamilton came here in 1772, and things had somewhat, things were already in pretty big uproar against the empire, and there were numerous major problems that the colonists were screaming about. A lot of them economic, and many people don't really emphasize the economic aspect of that. But you had limitations on what could be manufactured here. You had restrictions as to where trade could go. Everything had to go through Britain. You had a intrusive attempted enforcement against those who might want to trade with somebody else. We were to be a supply source of raw material for the mother country. Everything was to be produced there, and then we buy from them.
I mean, the manufactured goods would be produced
Absolutely,
in
manufactured.
England.
Very important. The Iron Act of 1750 was long before Hamilton, but was mentioned in numerous of the resolves going into the revolution as one of the abuses that was being carried out by the British. There was also the fact that there was a Currency Act passed, a number of currency acts in 1762 and 1764, which restricted the ability of the colonies to produce their own credit, the bills of credit in particular. The British had already years before, decades before, banned the issuance of coin, which had been pioneered up in New England. But this caused, according to Benjamin Franklin, a tremendous crimp on internal trade in the colonies and their cooperation with the West Indies and other places where they did trade. So all of these, so there was a vice grip for the benefit of the mother country in terms of what could be done here economically. And Hamilton was actually quite aware of that very early on. For his first major political document that was not signed, and people didn't tend to sign these things, but was done in the December of 1774 to defend the first Continental Congress and its actions against the British Crown's crackdown on Boston. He had a vision at that point of saying, number one, he said, look, all these rules that you have put on us, you say we owe you, right? Boston should, we should pay these taxes no matter what you decide to give to us. Because we've been benefited you, we've defended you from the French, we've done this, we've done that. And he said, all these rules that we've agreed to on trade up to now have benefited you. And we've paid for the troops in the 7 Years' War and so forth and so on. So we could take care of ourselves, right?
We could become a manufacturing country by ourselves.
We could begin to produce our own wool. We could begin to produce, whatever we need, and live without trade with Great Britain. He was facing those who said, well, we can't assert our rights because the British will cut us off and then we won't be able to get all these manufactured goods. And he said, well, we have tremendous resources in this country. We have the people, we have a growing population, we have the land, we have, we can become a great nation ourselves. And he was talking about a nation, not a state. He was writing in New York State against a creep who was, attacking was addressing the local farmers, allegedly, against the First Continental Congress. But what he actually was talking about was to the grandeur of a future America, which was able to produce all the essentials for its prosperity itself. He's not, I don't believe he was an isolationist in the way that people would think isolationism today, but he's talking about the essentials, which he later on lays out in the Report on Manufactures, his major writing on his vision of a future United States. That has been one of my major concentrations over all this time, and really was my introduction to Hamilton, was the
Report on Manufactures.
Was the Report on Manufactures.
Yeah.
And in particular, the fact that he was presenting the necessity and desirability of introducing manufactures into the society as not only a benefit for economic survival, but also for the stimulation of the human mind and the creativity of the human mind. That's the particular phrase that stuck out at me, thinking, gee, I took economics 101, I don't remember any discussion of economics which addressed that issue.
Let me ask you just on that, since he has that point of view and he expressed that phrase, the stimulation of the human mind in the report on manufacturing, would you say that he would favor, this is a matter of opinion, but would you say that he would favor advanced industries, I don't know, that would be skilled industries, machine industries, things that involved, education, as the economy grew, would he favor that kind of a factory instead of or over the kind of manufacturing where people are working under very bad conditions, a sweatshop and that sort of thing? Would you say that he is in favor of one kind of manufacturing over another?
In that same section of the report on manufacturers where he's talking about the advantages, and also in the sections where he's talking about where he's countering the idea that the United States could never do this because it doesn't have the skilled manpower, it doesn't have the resources, it doesn't have the money, its wages are too high. He doesn't say cut the wages. He says we can use machinery to cheapen the mode of production. And he's constantly talking about the desire for technological innovation in the productive manufacturing sector, and how that's helpful to agriculture as well. Because of course he was not anti-agriculture. I mean, people say it was anti-agriculture because he wanted to provide government support for manufacturing.
Maybe just,
it's manufacturing will provide a market for the agricultural goods. It will provide the ability to improve their productivity. And he said, you're never going to convince people in this huge country not to go farming, but we have to have for our own independence. I mean, you don't have political independence without economic independence. And that is one of the critical elements that he wanted to strike forward.
Let me ask you this. How did this, or why, put it this way, why did the slave owners oppose Hamilton's program? And I guess the follow-up to that would be how did he oppose slavery, and what were his views on other race-related things like relations with Native Americans? But first of all, why did the slave owners oppose Hamilton's program?
Well, for the most part, they didn't like the idea that you had a strong central government, which was what Hamilton believed was necessary in order to have the credit and the coherence and unity of the country. And because they felt that was implicitly a threat to their ability to run their economy the way they want, i.e. to maintain their slavery. They were aware that he was on record against slavery both as an economic detriment and a moral detriment. He was a leader of the New York Manumission Society. And unlike some, right from the beginning, he said he was part of a committee that said everybody on this society should get rid of their slaves.
There were slaves in New York too, right?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, they weren't plantations, but they were, people had slaves. That was defeated, unfortunately, but that was Hamilton's view. So he was very well known as being opposed to slavery, and implicitly his policies, even though slavery is not mentioned in the report on manufactures, his policies of creating a unified nation with transportation, interconnections, with the advance of technologically of industry, of creating that kind of environment, was actually an implicit threat to continuing slavery. I mean, why didn't you have the development of the same kind of transportation networks in the South that you had elsewhere in the country? In large part, there was fear of communicating the idea that you could have, that people could live a different life. Blacks could live a different
I
life.
think isn't that a little bit like in Russia, where some of the aristocrats were opposed to railroads because peasants might see somebody from some other place and not believe that their landlord was God, and that their town was the only thing there was.
Absolutely, absolutely. And that's one reason that even though there were some factories in the South that employed slave labor, this was a very limited phenomenon, because when the enslaved people were in those cities, they saw all sorts of people living better lives, and they had a lot more clout. They got ideas. They got ideas.
Yeah.
And that's why education lagged so much in the South. Hamilton, one of the major projects of the New York Manumission Society was a school, right? A major school for both enslaved and free Blacks. It played a very important role. It educated hundreds of people, and it wasn't just a manual labor school, in the sense that, for example, the rudiments of astronomy were actually taught, because as you probably know, a lot of the road to opportunity for a lot of Black men was to go to sea, and work on the ships, and obviously they needed to know where they were, so they needed to be able to read the stars and get that kind of knowledge. So he very much backed, and his commitment was very much backing education. He was also a founder of a school that was set up with the Oneida Indians in New York.
Mm-hmm.
This is now called Hamilton College. Unfortunately, I've never been there. I would really like to go there and see what they have to say about
upstate New York.
Yeah, it's in the middle of New York, sort of. And that is, so he had that kind of, he didn't just say development of the human mind. He did certain things that were pushing toward a policy of education that would benefit, people who were basically cast aside by the current society, by the British colonial society and by the slave society. So they really hated it. And Jefferson in the later period that you've concentrated more on, in the 1825, I mean, he was about to write a major diatribe against any national, against the National Survey Act and any national contribution to a nationally connected transportation network, that this was tyranny for the
Jefferson
federal
in his old
government
age.
to do this. And That is, but in the report on manufacturers, Hamilton is already saying that if a transportation project expands beyond one state, there should be federal government, attention to that, to planning for that transportation. So
Right.
that's, back in 1791, he really did have a vision of pulling the country together toward a functioning industrial economy.
Let's get to his reputation. Now, he's been charged with being a stooge for the wealthy. And so you could ask, how does inducing the rich to buy the bonds of the government help the country? And on the other side, isn't that interfering in the freedom to do what we like with our own money? Which is what, he's charged in both accounts.
Right.
That he's a stooge of the wealthy. He's giving them inducements to buy government bonds, but on the other hand, isn't he interfering in the private decision making about what we will do with our own money?
Well, I think it actually starts in a slightly different way, because when he started, these rich people already were owed a lot of money by the federal government.
Okay. From the
So
revolution.
from the revolution. So the point was, and generally they wanted to be paid. So, but he said, and set up a system where, to make it beneficial for them not to be paid their principal right away, to be paid interest on a regular basis, which he absolutely did, but to get them to put their money into the national bank for the benefit of the country as a whole, which eventually would be to their benefit as well. So the idea was to set up, to use the fact that these people were rich and had committed their funds, to make them act in the public interest. His view was, national banking is more of a public utility than for private profit. The idea is, let's have a system where we convince these people and set it up so that we benefit as a country for the general welfare, and in order to with the aid of this money. So
I guess he was really controlling the policy for the national bank anyway, that the first one was set up. But so he wanted to encourage those people to see that their investments were going to be in the national interest.
right, and he wanted to ensure that that's the way the money was used. He also wanted to induce people and the state government of New Jersey to establish a sort of pioneer industrial project in the Society for Useful Manufactures, which was established at the Passaic Falls. It's now the city of Paterson. It established the city of Paterson, New Jersey. That was sort of a pilot project to try to get that, to show how it would work, right? And very interestingly, this was not your company town. It was not even like Lowell, Massachusetts or something, where it's one industry where it's controlled. It was to be a multi-industry operation. And according to friends who have studied this a lot longer than I have, they actually provided credit for small startups in some cases. Now, it had a lot of financial problems at the beginning. So do a lot of companies. I mean, but by 1800, it really began to flourish, and ultimately, for about 150 years or 140 years or so, functioned as a place where a great number of important manufacturing developments occurred. The silk industry, I think, some of the railroad cars that were involved. I think the one that was at Promontory Point was actually built there. And so,
Locomotives, you mean?
yeah,
Yeah,
the railroad.
yeah, yeah. So Passaic, New Jersey, then was this site that he set up. Good.
Yeah, well,
Yeah.
it was the waterfalls. It was the source of the uh, of power. It was the biggest waterfall in the United States at the time because Niagara was still occupied by the British. Um,
Okay.
and it was set up with a series of raceways to run through the industrial park. It was designed by L'Enfant, right? And was
Good.
pretty pretty significant and advanced at the time. And in fact, one of the uses of the report on manufactures was to circulate in England and Ireland to recruit people to come over and be involved in this manufacturing
Yeah,
project. So said, look, this is where the future is.
that's right.
So,
So on foreign policy, which affected in those days as it does now, the politics of the country. Didn't he oppose Jefferson on Jefferson's support for the French Revolution? Why did he oppose that? And well, let's start with that. Why was he opposed to supporting or having the U.S. come in and on the side of France when France was having a revolution, was at war with Britain? Was he pro-British? Or was he a warmonger against the French?
um, none of the above. At the beginning, he supported the French Revolution. He was hopeful that it was with the first declarations of the rights of man and so forth. He turned against the French Revolution when it became, you know, a bloody mess. And unlike Jefferson, he didn't believe that what's the quote, you know, a little blood nourishes the tree of liberty, you know. So the at that point, it's what he believed was very dangerous, because he, like Gouverneur Morris, didn't believe that the French peasantry had, and the French population really had the institutions to be able to function in the way that an American representative democracy could, American Republic could. So despite the fact that there were legal obligations, which we had to France to pay money back, that money was ultimately paid. He didn't hurry up the payments as requested. He was very much afraid of the kind of mob rule that was devastating that country. So he didn't want to see it come to the United States. And he feared that supporters of that Jefferson was encouraging that kind of activity. And when the French sent over Genet to encourage that kind of activity, he got more intense on that matter.
Was he pro-British?
I don't believe he was. He saw benefits that had, you know, he saw some of the good things that had happened in Britain. And he very much felt the necessity to maintain trade relations for the sake of the solvency of the country. But he chafed, I mean, from the correspondence that I've the collected works that I've read, correspondence, he chafed just like everybody else against the impressment of seamen and the violations of American rights on the sea. But he agonizes over. He said, "But we can't afford to go to war. We just can't afford to do it at this point. We're going to, we have every right to, but we're not prepared for that. It will destroy the country." So, I mean, one of the major reasons people say that he was pro-British is because of the Bank of the United States. They say that's just like the Bank of England. Well, there are technical aspects of it that are similar in the sense of the use of private bonds for finance. But but there was much more government control of the bank here as opposed to the bankers controlling the government there.
Right.
And the purpose was all important, right? The
Yeah.
purpose there was to finance the wars and the other imperial adventures that were being cooked up.
Constantly, all the time, they were paying for wars out of the Bank of
Right.
England.
And here, the purpose was explicitly to become a nursery for industry, commerce, and agriculture, to provide credit for that. That was the explicit purpose of First Bank of the United States.
Not for speculation.
Not for, well, not for speculation in this way that we understand speculation today. Of course, back then they used the term speculation sometimes for investment, right?
Right.
People
No, not for financial pyramid.
not for financial shenanigans. No, which is and having making money and all that. It's for he said that when the British some of the British financial institutions invested in the Bank of the United States. People said, "Oh, they're going to take over." He said, as long as we're using their money to build canals and other durable improvements in our country, what's the problem? They have no power. The Bank of the United States did not allow any foreigners to be on their board. And it was controlled by the United States, and it was overseen by the Secretary of the Treasury and the Congress.
It's a little different. It's a little different from the idea of refinancing a debt at a higher rate of interest, which really enslaves countries.
Right. And plus, one of his arguments for the Bank of the United States, for example, was that it would reduce usury, right? Well, at the same time, as you're well aware, Jeremy Bentham is writing in defense of usury on the other side of the pond, so to speak. So it's a totally different conception of the purpose of banking, of national banking, and totally connected to the idea of the general welfare for the population. And people should really try to read that 30,000 word piece called the Report on Manufactures.
Let me ask you this about Hamilton personally. Was Hamilton a Christian? And what does that mean? What did that mean to him? If so.
Well, he certainly said he was a Christian, and I don't think there's anybody who should. He is noted to be extremely religious during his college years. People say, well, later he didn't go to church. Well, you know, I don't think that says too much. I believe he was Christian, and his attitude toward the less fortunate reflected that a Christian outlook. That's about all I can say about that, because I don't really know a lot more. I know that at the end of his life, when he had done the duel, he had to get well, because dueling was against the
Right.
rules of the church, it took a lot of persuading to get him to be given last rites, but or last communion, I don't know which they did.
Well,
But
what about the idea of the need for government itself, the purpose of government? One conception of that, which is certainly not a Christian idea, is that people are so just intrinsically bad that they need a strong government to keep them from killing each other, as opposed to another idea of government that we have a right to improve ourselves with having our own self-government, and that people have a right to happiness, and that would be maybe more in line. Is that based on a conception of what people are all about, the nature of man, or what?
I believe so. He actually addresses that question almost in those terms in that first paper that I was mentioning back in 1774, because he's saying that he's addressing the fact of, are there any intrinsic God-given rights that we have, right? Or and government has to follow them to be legitimate? Or is government based upon or do we start tabula rasa, right, with everyone having their own individual interests, and the government needing a government to keep us from killing each other, right? So he says he believed that the guy he was arguing against was Hobbesian, in the sense that he conceived of people not having any interest in the legitimacy of government, not being dependent upon honoring those God-given rights, natural law, and that he believed that was the case, that you had to. He has a famous statement about, the law of nature is not written in various parchments, it's written on the hearts of man, right? It's the most poetic thing he ever said. That's a paraphrase. It's not as beautiful as the original statement, but it's directly attacking this idea that government is a force that you need to defend yourself against another nation, or everybody against each other. A government has a trust to honor those God-given rights that people have.
So in terms of his, just going forward, or his the effect that he had here and elsewhere, his idea of government-led improvement, or industrialization and improvement in the economy, how widely was that adopted in the world after Hamilton's leaves the scene?
Well, it really continued. First, in this country, by a faction of, or a section of the Democratic Republican Party, of course, led by Matthew Carey and so forth.
And Henry
But
Clay.
and
Yeah.
Matthew Carey, Henry Clay, Henry Carey, it goes up to Lincoln and beyond. And then but as I said, the report on manufacturers did circulate internationally. And the Russians got it in 1807. They translated it into Russian in 1807. A lot of the other influence from the report on manufacturers and Hamilton's idea of government support for industrialization and infrastructure came through the Careys and so forth. Carey would reprint large sections of the report on manufacturers in some of his writings at the end of the 18 teens, and it would circulate throughout. So that, and through that network, more than directly, I believe, it got Hamilton's ideas got into Germany. They got heavily into Japan. They got into Russia, and because all these countries were equally victims of British imperialism, and felt the weight of that, they were looking for an alternative to what could possibly happen.
If you go to countries like Japan and Korea, South Korea, say in the 20th and 21st century, these countries, and let alone China, we won't get into the communists, but all these countries, in one way or another, had government intervention in the economy, didn't they? And did they?
Absolutely, absolutely. They picked up the idea that you couldn't have a functioning, progressive, economy good for the welfare of the people if it was run by, local fiefdoms, number one, and without a central source of credit, number two, and a government committed to using that credit for economic independence. So I'm sorry, that's just I can't stop it.
That's all right. You can't stop progress.
But yeah, they all picked up on this idea that that Hamilton is very much associated with, and in fact more so than many people in the United States, because Hamilton was so trashed in the Jeffersonian era that it made that people were shy of talking about him, and shy of endorsing him by name. The one very interesting thing, one talk I gave was attended by a woman who was descended from an Ethiopian father, and she liked the talk, and then she said, my father used to tell me to read Hamilton, right? But I preferred to read Lincoln instead, right? But I thought that was very interesting, because if you look at Africans aspiring to establish nations with their own independent source of credit and industrialization, clearly there were people there who were looking at who did this, in the United States, and it was this genius Alexander Hamilton who, despite, everything we've read about his personal life or this or that, was able to bring the country out of bankruptcy.
Well, if you mentioned these African countries, in the period after World War II, we have countries in Asia and Africa in particular trying to set up modern states, independently come out of colonialism. They also were non-aligned, a lot of them. They wanted to not be involved in the Cold War. They didn't want to take the side of the US or the Soviet Union. And I think thinking of people like Nehru, Nasser, and Nkrumah in Africa. So would you say that Hamilton's economics and also his idea of neutrality would correspond in some ways to their thinking?
I would say so. I don't know how familiar they were with the economic side of the fight but probably they were. Certainly we know that the non-aligned countries very much looked to the Declaration of Independence, the idea of the freedom from colonialism. The economic side, I think, came more slowly and with more difficulty. And partly that's because of dereliction of duty here, I think, in terms of promoting the.
No, but I'm talking about the aspirations of a leader.
Oh, the aspirations are
these people
totally.
wanted self-government, right?
Yeah.
And to be independent economically.
And they knew that they needed to have economic independence, but the path to economic independence, it seemed incredibly daunting, right? At that time, there were, as you know, there were people who wanted to help them in that direction. FDR wanted to help them in that direction. Kennedy wanted to help them in that direction, but they faced, overwhelming resistance for the most part, it seemed to me. Some more successful than others, probably India more successful than others in some respects. But I think that the knowledge of the font of ideas that exists in Alexander Hamilton's writings, particularly the Report on Manufactures, was lacking in the level that it should have been. I mean, after all, I'm so impressed by the fact that the Grant administration sent Peshon Smith to Japan to actually propagandize for the American system. What, didn't Cassius Clay do the same thing in London, in Russia? You know that better than I, perhaps. But where we actually used to say, let's spread the wealth of ideas that we have here about how to become an independent, economically wealthy nation. Just the opposite of today. How if we have a great invention, we should save it for ourselves and sanction you if you decide to do it yourself. So I think we had failure here, and what I'm trying to do with these books is to reverse that ignorance and inspire people to take up those ideas again.
So Hamilton's role in the founding of the country is in many ways an inspiration and a required inspiration for us now.
Absolutely. I mean, people are always talking today about how we were bankrupt. And we can learn a lot by looking back at what was done there. Of course, you know, bankruptcy takes many forms. There can be moral bankruptcy as well as financial bankruptcy, and we certainly live in different cultural times than we did then. Actually, there was during COVID, there was a op-ed written in one of the Texas papers that said that raised the Hamilton example as what should be turned to. This crisis, maybe we could use this crisis to really rethink how we're running this economy. And let's look at what Alexander Hamilton did, you know, basically from nothing, right, to create a nation that began to function
I,
for the general welfare of the people.
I would bet that if the people were given a vote on whether our country should support a revival of manufacturing, no matter what some leaders think, they would vote pretty much in favor. That's all we have time for now. For this time, we could maybe look forward to seeing you again. Certainly go to American System Now, Nancy's blog, and hold up those books again. How can they get these books?
They're on Amazon. They're on
Hamilton
Amazon.
versus Wall Street. And what's the other one?
Whoops.
Defeating Slavery.
Yep.
Hamilton's American System showed the way.
Right.
Good.
Okay.
Thank you
very
so much, Nancy. It's been a wonderful pleasure to have you talk to me and talk to the people that are listening to this broadcast.
Thank you, Tony.
All right.
Appreciate it.
Bye-bye.
Bye.